My son thought I was asleep. He thought I was senile. He thought the stroke had scrambled my brain enough to make me sign away the Victorian home I bought with 40 years of sweat and engine grease. He was already planning the renovations with his wife Courtney, while I was lying in the hospital bed hooked up to machines that beeped in time with my breaking heart. But they forgot one thing. I was a master mechanic for the Navy for 3 decades. I know how to spot a leak before the pipe bursts. And at 2 a.m., while they slept in the guest room they had already claimed as their own, I did not call a nurse. I called upon the only thing that matters in this country: the law. Before I tell you how I evicted my own son from a house he thought he owned, let me know where you are listening from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an ungrateful child a brutal lesson. The first thing I heard was not a voice of concern. It was the rhythmic, impatient tapping of a high heel against the hospital linoleum. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like a countdown. I opened my eyes. The hospital room was white, blindingly so. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and cheap perfume. Courtney's perfume. It was a scent that always reminded me of chemicals used to strip paint harsh and artificial. My son Kendrick was standing by the window, his back to me. He was typing furiously on his phone, his shoulders hunched in that way he always did when he was hiding something. I looked down at my hands resting on the scratchy hospital blanket. They were dark, rough, covered in scars from decades of welding torches and wrench slips. These were hands that had built a life. These were hands that had paid for Kendrick's private school, his college tuition, and his first car. Then I shifted my gaze to Courtney. She was sitting in the visitor chair, scrolling through her iPad with aggressive swipes. Her nails were long, painted a sharp crimson, perfect and useless. She looked up. Her eyes did not soften when she saw I was awake. They just narrowed, calculating. "Oh, you are awake," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement of inconvenience. She checked her gold wristwatch, a gift I knew Kendrick could not afford. "You have been out for 6 hours, Solomon. We were beginning to think we would have to cancel our dinner reservations." Kendrick spun around. "Dad, you scared us." His voice was thin, reedy. He didn't sound scared. He sounded guilty. He walked to the bedside but stopped 2 feet away as if my condition was contagious. "What happened?" I croaked. My throat felt like I had swallowed a handful of gravel. "Minor heart episode." Courtney cut in before Kendrick could speak. She stood up, smoothing her designer skirt, and walked over to the bed. She did not touch me. She loomed over me like a vulture waiting for the carcass to cool. "The doctor says you are stable, but there is a complication." I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, weighed down by medication and age. "What complication?" I asked. "The insurance, Solomon," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "They are refusing to cover the stent procedure. They say your policy lapsed 3 months ago due to non-payment." I narrowed my eyes. My mind was groggy, but it was not broken. My insurance policy was with the shipyard union. It was deducted automatically from my pension. It was gold-plated. It did not lapse. It was ironclad. I had checked the statement just last week when I was organizing my files, but I said nothing. I watched them. I wanted to see the shape of the trap before I stepped into it. "We need to pay a deposit," Kendrick said, stepping forward. His eyes were wet, but the tears did not fall. It was a performance I had seen before, usually when he needed money for a new business venture that was guaranteed to fail. $50,000, Dad. Or they won't operate. They will discharge you." He grabbed my hand. His palm was sweaty and cold. "I don't have that kind of money, Dad. I checked your checking account and you don't have enough liquid cash either." But Courtney, she found a solution. Courtney pulled a folder from her oversized designer bag. It was crisp blue and looked official. "We can use the equity in your house, Solomon. It is the only way to save your life. I just need you to sign this authorization so I can talk to the bank immediately. We can get an emergency line of credit secured by the deed." She held the paper in front of me. She held a heavy fountain pen in the other hand. "Sign here," she pointed. She was pressing the paper down hard against the clipboard, her hand covering the top half of the document. I looked at Kendrick. He was biting his lip, looking at the door, unable to meet my gaze. This was the boy I had taught to fish. The boy I had held when he scraped his knee. Now he was standing there letting his wife hustle his dying father. "I need my glasses," I whispered. "You don't need glasses to save your life." Solomon. Courtney snapped her mask, slipping for a fraction of a second. "Just sign the line." We are trying to help you." I reached for the clipboard. My hand was shaking partly from the aftermath of the attack, but mostly from a rage that was starting to boil in my gut. I took the clipboard and brought it closer to my face. Courtney tried to keep her hand on the top of the page, but I shifted the board just an inch. That was all I needed. For 30 years, I read blueprints for naval destroyers. I spot hairline fractures and steel hulls that other men miss with microscopes. I saw the margins, I saw the font. And just as she shifted her grip to pull the paper back, I saw the footer at the very bottom of the page in size 8 font. It didn't say medical financial consent. It said quit claim deed transfer. They weren't trying to save my heart. They were trying to steal my home, my Victorian house in Oakland, the house Etta and I had bought when the neighborhood was rough, the house we had restored board by board, the house where Etta had died in my arms. They wanted to take it, flip it, and turn it into cash to fuel their vanity. The realization hit me harder than the heart attack. My son was not just weak, he was a thief. I looked up at them. Courtney was smiling an encouraging, predatory smile. Kendrick was pale. If I confronted them now here in this hospital room, they would just find another way. They would say I was confused, paranoid, suffering from dementia. They would petition the court for guardianship. Courtney had probably already set that paperwork in motion. No, I could not fight them with anger. I had to fight them with leverage. "Give me the pen," I whispered. Courtney uncapped it and shoved it into my hand. I let my hand tremble violently. I allowed a drop of saliva to escape the corner of my mouth, playing the part of the broken, senile old man they wanted me to be. I looked at the signature line. I signed Solomon Hayes. But I did something I had not done since I was an apprentice signing off on scrap metal. I added a tiny, imperceptible loop at the end of the S, a mark I used to use to identify defective parts at the yard. And I deliberately left off my middle initial T for Thomas. My legal signature, the one on file with the county, and my living trust always included the T. It was a small detail. To an amateur, it looked like a signature. To a forensic accountant or a judge, it was a forgery, or at best, a signature made under duress. Courtney practically snatched the paper from me. She didn't check the signature details. She didn't look at my condition. She just looked at the paper as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "I will go give this to the administration," she said, her voice suddenly bright and cheerful, the fake concern vanishing instantly. She walked out of the room, her heels clicking with a victory rhythm. Kendrick lingered for a second. He looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flash of shame in his eyes, but he pushed it down. "It is for the best, Dad," he muttered. "We will take care of everything." Then he followed her. I was alone in the room. The monitor beeped steadily. I closed my eyes, but I did not sleep. I waited. I waited until the sun went down. I waited until the nurse came in to check my vitals and told me that my son had left instructions not to be disturbed, because they had to go prepare the house for my return. Prepare the house. That meant they were going to start throwing away my life. I waited until the hospital grew quiet, the only sounds being the distant squeak of rubber shoes in the hallway. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11 p.m. They thought the signature was the end. They didn't know it was the declaration of war. I reached into the bedside drawer where the nurse had put my personal effects. My old cracked smartphone was there. I turned it on. I had 48 hours before they could file that document on Monday morning. I had 48 hours to destroy their plan and save my legacy. I sat up in bed, ignoring the ache in my chest. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a mechanic, and I had a mess to fix. The taxi ride home from the hospital was quiet. Kendrick drove with both hands gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead. He did not ask how I was feeling. He did not offer to stop for food, even though I had not eaten anything but hospital gelatin for 2 days. I sat in the back seat watching the neighborhood pass by. It was my neighborhood, but it was changing. The old barber shop was now an artisanal coffee roaster. The community center where Etta used to teach piano was now a boutique yoga studio. And then we pulled up to my house. My heart, which the doctors said was fragile, hammered against my ribs like a piston in a failing engine. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and stopped dead. There were white vans in the driveway. Men in white overalls were swarming over my porch like termites. I walked up the steps, my legs heavy, pushing past a ladder. The smell hit me before I even crossed the threshold. It was the sharp chemical stench of cheap latex paint. I walked into the living room and felt the air leave my lungs. "Stop," I said. The painter on the ladder looked down, brush dripping. He looked at me, then looked past me. Courtney stepped out from the kitchen. She was wearing a mask likely to protect herself from the fumes she had ordered. She pulled it down, revealing a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Welcome home, Solomon," she said. "We wanted to surprise you with a fresh start." I looked at the walls. For 40 years, my living room had been painted a warm, deep sunflower yellow. Etta had chosen it. She said it made the house feel like it was always holding sunlight even during the foggy Bay Area winters. It was the color of our joy. It was the backdrop to every Christmas morning, every birthday, every quiet evening we spent reading together. Now it was gone. In its place was a flat, soulless gray. It was the color of wet concrete. It was the color of a prison cell. "What have you done to my house?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We are modernizing, Solomon," Courtney said, walking over and running a manicured fingernail along the wet wall. "That yellow was dated. It was tacky. It screams 1980. This is industrial mist. It is the #1 color for property value in the district right now. It makes the space look bigger, cleaner." She was talking about my home as if it were a product on a shelf. She was not seeing the memories. She was seeing the square footage. "I did not ask for this," I said, stepping forward. "Etta chose that color." "Well, Etta is not here, is she?" Courtney snapped. The mask of politeness slipped for a second. "We have to think about the future. If we want this asset to appreciate, we have to strip away the personality. Buyers want a blank canvas, not a history lesson." I looked at Kendrick. He was standing in the doorway holding my small suitcase. He looked at the gray walls, then at his shoes. "Tell her to stop, Kendrick," I said. "Tell them to put it back." "Dad, it is already done." He mumbled. "It is just paint. It looks nice. It looks professional." Professional. That was the word he used. He wanted his childhood home to look like a dental office. I realized then that they were not just renovating. They were erasing. They were scrubbing away every trace of the black family that had lived, loved, and struggled within these walls. They were whitewashing my life with a coat of gray paint. I walked past them, needing to get away from the smell. I headed toward the den where I kept my music, my sanctuary. If I could just put on a record, maybe some Coltrane or Miles Davis, I could drown out the sound of the rollers slapping against the walls. I needed the crackle of the needle on vinyl. I needed the soul that they could not paint over. I opened the door to the den and froze. The shelves were empty. The custom mahogany shelves I had built with my own hands were bare. My turntable, a vintage Technics that I had restored part by part, was gone. The crate of records, my first pressings of jazz legends, the albums Etta and I had danced to at our wedding, were missing. "Where is it?" I asked. My voice was low, dangerous. Courtney walked up behind me. She was holding a clipboard now, ticking things off a list. "Oh, the clutter room," she asked. "We cleared it out." "Cleared it out." I turned to face her. That was a collection worth thousands of dollars. That was history. "Where is it?" She waved a hand toward the back door. "The recycling truck comes tomorrow morning. We put it all in the blue bins." Honestly, Solomon, it was a health hazard. Those old cardboard sleeves were full of mold and dust mites. I could feel my allergies flaring up just walking in here. Besides, nobody listens to those big plastic discs anymore. Everything is digital. We are going to turn this room into a meditation space. I pushed past her. I ran as fast as my old legs would carry me out the back door. There, lined up against the fence, were the recycling bins. The lids were open. I saw them. I saw a kind of blue bent in half, the cover torn. I saw Love Supreme sitting in a puddle of something sticky. They had thrown them in with the soda cans and the junk mail. I reached in my hands, shaking, trying to pull them out. I grabbed a handful of albums, clutching them to my chest like a lifeline. "Dad, stop!" Kendrick's voice came from the porch. I spun around. He was standing there watching me dig through the trash. "Help me, Kendrick," I said. "These are your mother's favorites. Help me save them." Kendrick took a step down, but Courtney put a hand on his chest. "Leave him, Kendrick," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Look at him. He is digging through garbage like a homeless person. This is exactly what the doctor was talking about. He is hoarding. He is attached to trash. It is pathological." I stood up, clutching the ruined records. I felt a roar building in my throat, a sound I hadn't made since I was a foreman shouting over the noise of grinding steel. "This is not trash," I bellowed. "This is my life. You have no right. Don't you dare raise your voice at me." Courtney stepped forward, her face hard and cold. "This is our house now, Solomon. You signed the paper. We are cleaning up your mess. If you want to live here, you will follow our rules. And rule number 1 is that we do not keep garbage in the main living areas." Kendrick looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to calm down to submit. "Dad, please, just let it go. It is just old stuff. We can get you a Spotify account." I looked at my son. He didn't understand. It wasn't about the music, it was about the disrespect. It was about the fact that he stood there and let this woman throw his heritage into a bin because she thought it was dusty. I looked down at the records in my arms. The covers were ruined. The vinyl was likely warped from the heat of the sun. I carefully placed them back in the bin, not because I agreed with her, but because I knew I could not save them, and I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing me cry over them. I wiped my hands on my pants. I stood up straight. "Fine," I said. Courtney smiled a tight, victorious little smirk. "Good. I am glad we are being reasonable. Now let's get you settled." She turned and walked back into the house. I followed with Kendrick trailing behind me like a lost puppy. She walked past the stairs leading up to the second floor where my bedroom was. The bedroom where I had slept for 40 years. The bedroom with the bay window looking out over the street. She stopped at the door under the stairs, the door to the basement. We made some changes to the sleeping arrangements. She said, not meeting my eyes. "Since Kendrick and I are going to be managing the property and the renovation, we need the master suite. It has the best light for my office. And the guest room is full of the furniture we are staging for the sale." She opened the basement door. A draft of cold, damp air drifted up. "We set up a cot for you down here," she said. "It is better this way. It is quieter. You won't be disturbed by the contractors coming in and out, and it is cooler, which is good for your blood pressure. You will have your own private space." I looked down the wooden stairs. They were steep. The basement was finished technically, but it was a workspace. It had a concrete floor. It smelled of oil and old wood. There was one small window high up near the ceiling covered in bars. "You are putting me in the cellar," I said. "It is a studio apartment, Solomon," Courtney corrected me. "Stop being dramatic. It is temporary, until we find a suitable facility for you." Kendrick spoke up, his voice rushed. "It is nice down there, Dad. I put your old recliner down there. And the TV. You like the basement. You used to spend all your time down there fixing things." I looked at Kendrick. He was right. I did used to spend my time down there. That was my workshop. That was where I fixed the things that were broken. That was where I kept my tools. I looked at Courtney. She was tapping her foot, waiting for a fight. She wanted me to argue. She wanted me to scream and refuse so she could call the doctor and say I was being aggressive. She wanted proof that I was unfit to be in the house. I took a deep breath. The anger that had been burning hot in my chest suddenly cooled into something else, something solid, something like steel. If they put me in the basement, I would be out of their way. If I was out of their way, they would stop watching me. If I was in the basement, I would be with my tools. I would be next to the fuse box. I would be next to the main water line. I would be next to the server rack I had installed years ago to hardwire the house for internet. They were not banishing me to a dungeon. They were sending the captain to the engine room. "That is fine," I said. My voice was calm, even. Courtney blinked. She looked surprised. She had expected a war. "Oh," she said. "Well, good. Kendrick, take his bag down." I walked to the top of the stairs. I looked at the gray walls one last time. I looked at the empty shelves where my music used to be. Then I looked at Courtney. "You are right, Courtney," I said. "The basement is where I belong. It is where the foundation of the house is." She didn't catch the double meaning. She just shrugged and turned away to answer her phone. I walked down the stairs one by one. The air got cooler. The smell of paint faded, replaced by the smell of earth and iron. I reached the bottom and pulled the string for the light bulb. The room was dim. My old workbench was in the corner, covered in a sheet. My tool chest was locked, dusty, but untouched. They hadn't thrown these things away because they were too heavy to move. They thought they were burying me. They didn't realize they had just given me access to the arsenal. Kendrick dropped my bag on the cot and fled back upstairs as fast as he could. He couldn't stand the guilt in the air down here. I sat on the cot. I listened to the footsteps creaking on the floorboards above my head. I heard Courtney laughing. I heard the pop of a cork. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was safely tucked away in the dark, waiting to die. I reached under the mattress of the cot. My fingers brushed against cold metal. I pulled it out. It was a spare key to the tool chest. I walked over to the red metal cabinet and unlocked it. The drawers slid open with a smooth, well-oiled hiss. Wrenches, screwdrivers, wire cutters. And in the bottom drawer, my old diagnostic laptop. I wasn't just a mechanic. I was a problem solver. And I had a very big problem living upstairs. I turned on the soldering iron. The little red light blinked on in the darkness. It was the only light I needed. The renovation of Solomon Hayes was about to begin, and it wasn't going to be the one they planned. The smell of seared ribeye steak drifted from the kitchen and filled the small basement stairwell where I stood. It was a rich, savory scent that triggered a memory of Sundays past when Etta would season a roast with garlic and rosemary and the whole house would smell like love. But tonight, that smell was not for me. I walked into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the porcelain plates with the gold rim that Etta and I had bought for our 25th anniversary. Kendrick and Courtney sat at the head of the table. Between them sat a platter of steaks glistening with butter and thyme. Beside it was a bowl of creamy mashed potatoes and glazed carrots. "Sit down," Solomon Courtney said without looking up from her phone. I looked at my place setting. It was not at the main table. It was at a small folding card table set up in the corner near the pantry door. It was the kind of table you sit at when you are in timeout. On it was a single plastic plate. I sat down. The chair was hard metal. I looked at my dinner. It was a piece of boiled chicken breast, white and rubbery, floating in a small pool of water. Next to it was a pile of steamed broccoli, limp and faded. There was no salt, no pepper, no butter. "What is this?" I asked, my voice calm but tight. "It is heart-healthy," Courtney said, cutting a piece of her steak. The knife slid through the meat like it was butter. Red juice ran onto the plate. "The doctor said you need to watch your sodium, Solomon. We are just looking out for you." I looked at Kendrick. He was stuffing his mouth with mashed potatoes, refusing to meet my eyes. He knew better. He knew I didn't have high blood pressure. He knew I worked out every day until the heart attack. This wasn't a diet. This was a demonstration. I took a bite of the chicken. It tasted like wet cardboard. I watched my son pour himself a glass of expensive red wine. "Can I have some salt?" I asked. Courtney sighed, dropping her fork with a clatter. It was a sound of exaggerated patience. "No, Solomon. You cannot. Do you want to have another heart attack? Do you want to die and leave us with the burden of a funeral? Eat your vegetables. You should be grateful we are cooking for you at all." Grateful. I chewed the flavorless broccoli. I watched them eat my food on my plates in my house while I sat in the corner like a dog being disciplined. Kendrick finally looked at me. For a second I saw the boy I raised. I saw the shame burning in his cheeks. But then Courtney placed her hand on his arm, claiming him, and he looked away. He took a sip of wine and washed down his conscience. I finished my meal in silence. I did not complain again. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me beg for flavor. I swallowed the humiliation along with the cold chicken. It sat in my stomach like a stone, fueling a fire that was beginning to roar. An hour later, the doorbell rang. The guests arrived in a flurry of beige coats and expensive cologne. There were 4 of them, friends of Courtney, real estate agents and developers, people who looked at a neighborhood like mine and didn't see families or history. They saw profit margins and potential. Courtney made me stand in the living room to greet them. She wanted to show me off, I realized. I was a prop. I was the old confused relic that justified her takeover. "Everyone, this is Kendrick's father, Solomon," she announced, her voice pitching up an octave into a fake, sugary tone. "He is staying with us for a little while. His health has been failing, poor thing." A man named Brad, tall, with teeth that were too white, stepped forward. He looked me up and down, taking in my worn flannel shirt and my work pants. He didn't offer his hand. He just nodded a dismissive jerk of his chin. "Good to meet you," he said, already turning his attention back to the room. "Great bones in this place, Courtney. High ceilings, original molding. Once you get rid of that awful smell of old grease, this place will be a gold mine." The smell he was talking about was the smell of the machine oil I used to clean my tools. It was the smell of hard work. They gathered in the living room, ignoring me completely. I stood by the hallway, invisible. "So," Brad said, swirling his wine glass. "How is the neighborhood shaping up?" Courtney laughed. "It is getting there. We are finally cleaning up the element. You know how it is. These old families hold on to these properties for generations, letting them rot. They don't have the capital to improve them. They just drag the property values down for the rest of us. The element. That is what she called us. My neighbors. Mrs. Johnson next door, whose husband was a Tuskegee airman. Mr. Henderson across the street, who ran the food bank for 30 years. We were the element. We were the dirt she wanted to scrub away to make room for coffee shops and luxury condos. Kendrick stood there nodding along. Yeah, Kendrick said, it is time for a change. The demographics are shifting. We are just ahead of the curve. Hearing my son use that word demographics to describe the erasure of his own people felt like a physical blow. I gripped the door frame. My knuckles turned ash gray. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw them out, but I knew that any outburst would just be used against me. See, they would say, he is aggressive, he is unstable. So I bit my tongue until I tasted copper. I turned and walked toward the basement door. Where are you going, Solomon? Courtney called out, not looking away from Brad. I am going to my room, I said. Good idea, she said. Try not to make too much noise down there. We are discussing business. I walked down the stairs. The heavy wooden door clicked shut above me, muffling the sound of their laughter. I was in the dark again. But the dark was my friend. The dark was where I did my best work. They thought I was down there sleeping. They thought I was crying. They didn't know that I knew every inch of this house because I was the one who kept it standing. In 1985, I installed the HVAC system myself. I used galvanized steel ducts, solid and conductive. I knew exactly how the airflow worked. There was a main return vent that sat directly under the dining room table. It ran straight down through the floor and opened up into the ceiling of the basement workshop. It was basically a metal speaking tube. I dragged my old wooden stepladder over to the center of the room. I climbed up until my head was just inches from the vent. I pressed my ear against the cold metal. The voices came through crystal clear. It was like I was sitting right next to them. Really impressive, Courtney Brad was saying. You moved fast on this. I had to, Courtney replied. Her voice was sharp, void of the fake sweetness she used on me. The old man is stubborn. But the heart attack was a blessing in disguise. It gave us the medical leverage we needed. I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs. So what is the timeline, Brad asked. Monday, Courtney said. We have an appointment with Judge Reynolds at 9 in the morning. Dr. Evans has already signed the competency affidavit. He owes me a favor after I helped him with that zoning issue last year. We are filing for emergency guardianship. We are claiming he is a danger to himself. Hoarding, delusions, inability to manage basic hygiene. Lies, all lies. And once you have guardianship, Brad asked. Tuesday, Courtney said. We signed the sale papers with your group. I want that cash transfer initiated by noon. We need to pay off Kendrick's situation before the sharks come collecting. I closed my eyes. Kendrick's situation. The gambling debts. They were selling my life to pay for his mistakes. And what about Solomon? Brad asked. Where does he go? Courtney laughed. It was a cold, cruel sound. Wednesday, she said. I found a facility in Fresno. It is state-funded, so it costs us almost nothing. It is a bit run down, smells like bleach and despair, but he won't know the difference. By the time we drop him off, Dr. Evans will have him so sedated he won't even know his own name. He will live out the rest of his miserable days staring at a wall, and we will be in Cabo celebrating our new fortune. Silence followed, then the sound of glasses clinking. To new beginnings, Kendrick said softly. I climbed down the ladder. My legs were steady now. The trembling was gone. They had a plan. Monday guardianship, Tuesday sale, Wednesday exile. They had mapped out the end of my life over a steak dinner. I walked over to my workbench. I picked up a screwdriver. I weighed it in my hand. It felt solid, real. They thought they were dealing with a confused old man who would go quietly into the night. They were wrong. They were dealing with Solomon Hayes. I had fixed engines that kept ships afloat in the middle of storms. I had raised a family on a mechanic's wage. I had survived discrimination, loss, and hardship. I looked at the calendar on the wall. It was Friday night. I had 48 hours. 48 hours to outsmart a lawyer, a corrupt doctor, and my own treacherous family. I turned on my soldering iron. The red light blinked in the darkness like a warning beacon. Let them enjoy their steak, I whispered to the empty room. It will be the last good meal they have for a very long time. The house was silent, but it was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a crime scene before the police arrive. It was 2 in the morning. My legs were stiff from the cot in the basement, but my mind was racing like a turbine engine redlining in the red zone. I knew I could not sleep. Not after what I had heard through the vents. They were planning to sell my home on Tuesday. They were planning to ship me off to a warehouse for the dying on Wednesday. I sat up in the darkness. My eyes adjusted to the gloom of the basement. I looked at the ceiling, tracing the path of the floor joists I had reinforced after the earthquake in '89. I knew every squeak in those floorboards. I knew exactly where to step to move like a ghost. I stood up and walked to the stairs. I did not turn on the light. I climbed slowly, placing my feet on the edges of the steps where the wood was anchored tightest to the stringers. I reached the top of the stairs and opened the door a crack. The hallway was empty. A nightlight plugged into the wall cast a long, distorted shadow across the floor. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the rhythmic snoring coming from the guest room down the hall. They were sleeping soundly. Why wouldn't they? They thought they had won. They thought the game was over before I even realized I was playing. I slipped into the hallway and moved toward the room that used to be my study. It was the room where I kept my accounts, my manuals, and the blueprints of the house. Now Courtney called it her home office. The door was ajar. I pushed it open. The smell of her perfume hung in the air, thick and cloying. I turned on the small desk lamp, keeping the light low. The desk was a mess of fabric swatches and color palettes. But I wasn't interested in her interior design fantasies. I was interested in the trash can. People make a mistake when they try to hide things. They think that once they throw something away, it ceases to exist. But as a mechanic, I know that nothing just disappears. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. It just changes form. I reached into the metal bin under the desk. There were coffee cups, crumpled sticky notes, and a long, thick roll of paper that had been bent in half to fit inside. I pulled it out. It was heavy. Bond paper. The kind architects use. I unrolled it on the desk, weighing down the corners with a stapler and a tape dispenser. My breath hitched in my throat. At the top of the page, stamped in bold black ink, were the words, Hayes Luxury Condos, Phase 1. I stared at the drawing. It wasn't my house. It was a blocky, soulless structure made of glass and steel that rose 5 stories into the air, but the footprint was the same. The property lines were the same. I traced the lines with my calloused finger. I looked for the garden where Etta grew her prize-winning hydrangeas. It was gone, replaced by a concrete slab labeled bike storage. I looked for the front porch where I sat every evening to watch the sunset. Gone, replaced by a lobby with a security desk. Then I saw it. I saw the location of the master bedroom, the room where Etta and I had conceived our son, the room where I had held her hand as she took her last breath. On the blueprint, right over the space where our bed used to stand, were painted white lines and a symbol of a car. Parking space 4B. They were going to turn the sacred ground of my marriage into a parking spot for a stranger's Tesla. My hands started to shake, not from age, not from weakness, but from a rage so pure and white-hot that it felt like I had swallowed a live coal. Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. Crying would not save this house. Crying would not save my dignity. I took my phone out of my pocket and snapped a picture of the document. Then I crumpled it back up and shoved it deep into the trash exactly where I found it. I turned off the lamp. I needed to go back to the basement. I needed to think. But as I stepped into the hallway, I heard a noise. The front door unlocked. I froze in the shadows of the doorway. The front door creaked open and a figure stumbled in. It was Kendrick. He wasn't asleep in the guest room with his wife. He had been out. He closed the door softly, leaning against it for support. He looked terrible. His shirt was untucked, his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of stale smoke and nervous sweat. He ran a hand over his face, letting out a ragged sigh that sounded like a sob. He started to walk toward the stairs, toward the guest room. I stepped out of the shadows. "You are late," I said. Kendrick jumped, nearly tripping over his own feet. He spun around, clutching his chest. "Jesus, Dad," he hissed. "What are you doing lurking in the dark? You almost gave me a heart attack." I stood my ground. I did not move. "Where were you, Kendrick?" I asked. I was just taking a walk," he stammered. "I couldn't sleep. The stress of the renovation. You know." "Liar." I took a step closer to him. I could smell the fear on him. It was a sour scent distinct from the alcohol. "You were not walking," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "You were at the casino. Or maybe the underground game in Emeryville. Who is calling you, Kendrick? Who are those men leaving voicemails on the house line that you delete before Courtney hears them?" Kendrick's face went pale. In the dim light, he looked like a ghost. "I don't know what you are talking about," he he whispered, looking toward the bedroom door where Courtney was sleeping. Go back to bed, Dad. You are confused. I am not confused, I said. I heard you on the phone yesterday. I heard you say 50,000 by Tuesday. That is why you are selling my house so fast, isn't it? It isn't about my health. It isn't about the market. You owe money to bad people and you are selling my flesh and blood to pay them off. Kendrick's expression shifted. The fear evaporated, replaced by a sudden ugly flash of anger. He straightened up. He was taller than me now. Younger, stronger. You don't know anything, he spat. You are a senile old man living in the past. You think this house is a treasure. It is a money pit. It is a rotting pile of wood that is dragging us all down. I am doing you a favor. You are stealing from me, I said. You are stealing the only thing your mother left us. Don't you talk about her, Kendrick shouted, his voice cracking. He stepped forward and shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but I wasn't expecting it. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the edge of the hallway runner. I fell hard against the wall, my shoulder slamming into the plaster. The impact sent a shockwave of pain down my arm. I slid down the wall to the floor. Kendrick stood over me. His chest was heaving. His hands were balled into fists. For a second, he looked horrified at what he had done. He took a half step toward me, his hand reaching out. Dad, But then he stopped. He looked at me sitting on the floor, holding my shoulder. And he made a choice. He pulled his hand back. He hardened his heart. You fell, he said coldly. You are clumsy. This proves you can't live here alone. You are a danger to yourself. He turned his back on me. Go back to the basement, Solomon, he said, before you break something else. He walked down the hall and into the bedroom, closing the door with a soft click. I sat there on the floor for a long time. The pain in my shoulder throbbed in time with my pulse, but strangely the pain in my heart was gone. It had vanished the moment his hands pushed me against the wall. I realized then that I had been mourning the wrong thing. I had been mourning the loss of my house. I had been mourning the loss of my wife. But tonight, I had lost something else. I had lost my son. The boy I taught to ride a bike was gone. The young man who graduated college with eyes full of hope was gone. The man who had walked down the hall just now was a stranger. He was a desperate, greedy, broken stranger who would crush his own father to save his own skin. I slowly pulled myself up using the banister. I tested my shoulder. It was bruised but not broken. I was tough. I was built from older, stronger stuff than he was. I walked back to the basement door. I did not look back at the hallway. I did not look back at the photos on the wall. There is a rule in mechanics. When a part is rusted through, when it is corroded beyond repair, you do not try to save it. You do not try to patch it. You cut it out. You remove it completely so it doesn't poison the rest of the machine. Kendrick Hayes was no longer my son. He was a rusted part. He was a liability, and I was about to perform an extraction. I went down the stairs into the darkness of my workshop. I didn't feel lonely anymore. Solitude is different from loneliness. Loneliness is wanting someone who isn't there. Solitude is the strength of being alone with your purpose. I sat at my computer. I inserted the USB drive I had prepared earlier. I cracked my knuckles. The sadness was over. The time for sentiment was finished. Now it was time for the mechanic to go to work. I had 24 hours until Monday morning. That was more than enough time to dismantle their entire world bolt by bolt. They wanted a war. They wanted to treat me like an enemy combatant in my own home. Fine, I typed in the password. I typed in the screen glowed blue, illuminating my face. Let's see how they like it when the foundation crumbles beneath their feet. The next morning I put on my best performance. It was a role I never thought I would have to play. The role of the confused, obsolete old man. I sat on the living room sofa holding Courtney's iPad with both hands staring at the black screen as if it were a piece of alien technology. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I squinted my eyes. I made sure my hands trembled just enough to look pathetic, but not enough to drop the device. Courtney was in the kitchen making a smoothie that smelled like cut grass and pretension. She walked in checking her watch, already annoyed by my presence in her line of sight. "Courtney," I called out, making my voice sound thin and reedy. "I want to listen to that gospel song Etta used to like, the one by Mahalia Jackson. But I cannot make this machine work. It is asking for a code." She sighed a loud, exasperated exhale that was meant to make me feel small. She walked over, wiping her hands on a towel. "Honestly, Solomon, it is not nuclear physics. It is a touch screen. You just swipe up." I swiped my thumb across the glass, deliberately using too much pressure, making it fail. I don't understand, I muttered. It stays locked. She snatched the iPad from my hands. Her movements were sharp and aggressive. You are locking it out because you keep pressing the wrong buttons. Here, let me do it. She held the tablet in one hand and tapped the screen with the other. She didn't turn away. She didn't shield the screen. Why would she? To her, I was a dinosaur. I was a relic who couldn't figure out a microwave, let alone memorize a complex string of characters. She thought my mind was as gray and blank as the walls she had just painted. But she forgot one thing. I spent 30 years reading gauges on pressure valves that were vibrating at high frequencies. My eyes are old, but my dynamic vision is perfect. I watched her index finger dance across the glass. Top left, center right, bottom left, 4, 9, 1, 2, CHANEL 4912, Chanel, her favorite brand, and her birth year backwards. It was predictable. It was lazy. It was the password of someone who had never had to protect anything of real value. Here, she said, shoving the unlocked iPad back at me with a YouTube video loaded. Mahalia Jackson, now please use headphones. I have a conference call in 20 minutes and I cannot have wailing in the background. I took the iPad. Thank you, Courtney, I said humbly. You are very smart with these things. She didn't even acknowledge the compliment. She just turned on her heel and went back to the kitchen. I put the headphones on, but I didn't play the music. I sat there in silence, repeating the code in my head. Chanel 4912, Chanel 4912. I had the key to the castle. Now I just needed to lower the drawbridge. Opportunity knocked 20 minutes later. The sound of the shower running upstairs was my signal. Courtney had a routine. She took long, scalding showers every morning at 8 o'clock sharp. She used expensive scrubs and lotions that took time to apply. I knew the plumbing in this house better than I knew my own face. I listened to the pipes groaning behind the drywall. I heard the specific hiss of the water heater kicking into high gear. That sound meant I had exactly 12 minutes before the hot water ran out and she turned the faucet off. 12 minutes is a lifetime for a mechanic. I stood up from the sofa and placed the iPad gently on the coffee table. I walked to the stairs. I moved quietly, placing my weight on the balls of my feet. I went up the stairs and down the hall to the room that used to be my study. The door was open. Her laptop, a sleek silver machine, was sitting on the desk. It was closed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small black USB drive. It was given to me a year ago by my nephew Marcus. Marcus was a good kid, a systems administrator for a cybersecurity firm in Silicon Valley. He had given it to me when I asked him how to monitor my bank accounts better. He called it a recovery tool. I knew it was a keylogger. It was a simple script that recorded every keystroke typed on a machine and saved it to a hidden text file. I sat down at the desk. I opened the laptop. The screen woke up asking for a password. I didn't need to log into the operating system to plant the bug. I plugged the USB into the side port. The little light on the drive blinked green. Courtney and Kendrick thought I was baffled by electricity. They looked at my calloused hands and saw a laborer. They didn't know that being a submarine engineer meant understanding the most complex electrical systems on Earth. I knew circuits. I knew logic gates. I knew that a computer was just a series of switches open and closed on and off. I didn't need to know how to use Instagram to understand how to bypass a BIOS security protocol. I held down the boot key sequence. The screen flickered. A command prompt appeared. White text on a black background. This was a language I spoke. I executed the script. The progress bar moved across the bottom of the screen. 10%. I heard the pipes thump. The water pressure shifted. Someone had turned on a tap downstairs. Kendrick was up. 30%. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Heavy. Sluggish. Kendrick moving toward the kitchen for his hangover coffee. 60%. The shower upstairs was still running, but the pitch had changed. She was rinsing off. I had maybe 3 minutes left. 90%. Done. I pulled the USB drive out. I closed the laptop. I wiped the surface of the lid with my sleeve to remove any fingerprints. I stood up and adjusted the chair, making sure it was at the exact angle she had left it. Attention to detail is what keeps a vessel watertight. One loose bolt can sink a ship. One out-of-place chair could sink my plan. I slipped out of the room and was halfway down the stairs when the shower turned off. The silence from the bathroom was deafening. I made it to the kitchen just as Kendrick was pouring coffee. "Morning, Dad," he grunted, not looking at me. "Morning, son," I said. I walked past him straight to the basement door. I am going to take a nap. The music made me tired. I went down into the dark. My heart was beating a steady, heavy rhythm. I wasn't tired. I was wide awake. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the prey to walk into it. Night fell. The basement was cold, but I didn't feel it. I sat at my workbench, the only light coming from the screen of my old battered tablet. It was a heavy industrial-grade device I used for car diagnostics, but it had a solid Wi-Fi antenna. I had configured the keylogger to upload the log file to a shared cloud folder every hour. I refreshed the page. A new file appeared. Log entry 2000 HRs TXT. I opened it. It was a stream of chaos at first. Google searches for luxury handbags, text messages to friends complaining about the smell of the house, and then I found it. The smoking gun. At 7:45 p.m., she had opened her email client. The keystrokes were clear, to David. stricklandlaw@gmail.com. Subject update on the Oakland asset. I read the body of the email reconstructed letter by letter. David, good news. The old man signed the quitclaim deed yesterday at the hospital. I have the original hard copy in the safe. His signature is a little shaky, obviously, since he was drugged up, but it is legible enough to pass the county clerk's inspection. We need to file this first thing Monday morning before he clears his head or tries to contact his old lawyer. Once the deed is recorded, we can proceed with the guardianship hearing in the afternoon. He has no idea what is happening. He is completely pliable. Let's get this done so I can finally get out of this dusty dump. I stared at the words. Pliable. Dusty dump. She admitted it. She admitted I was drugged. She admitted the signature was questionable. She admitted the timeline. I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger is a hot emotion. It burns fast and burns out. What I felt was cold. I felt like the bottom of the ocean. They were not just stealing my house. They were stealing my agency. They were conspiring to strip me of my rights as a human being. I scrolled down. There was a reply from her lawyer. Great work, Courtney. I will have the paralegal waiting at the recorder's office at 8 a.m. sharp. Make sure you bring the original. Do not let Solomon out of your sight this weekend. I sat back in my chair. The old springs creaked. Don't let Solomon out of your sight. They thought they were the hunters. They thought they had the lion in a cage. But they forgot that the lion is only dangerous when he stops roaring and starts watching. I saved the file. I emailed a copy to 3 different secure servers. I printed a hard copy and tucked it inside the lining of my tool chest. I looked up at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sounds of their television upstairs. They were watching a reality show, laughing at someone else's misfortune. Laugh while you can, I whispered to the dark. Monday morning is coming, and you are going to find out that this old machine has one hell of a kickback. I turned off the tablet. I didn't need to see anymore. I had the coordinates. I had the timing. And most importantly, I had the motivation. I lay down on the cot, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. For the first time since the heart attack, I slept peacefully. I slept the sleep of a man who knows exactly what he has to do when the sun comes up. Saturday morning did not arrive with the warmth of the sun. It arrived with the cold click of a deadbolt sliding into place. Kendrick stood at the foot of the stairs, blocking my path to the kitchen. He was dressed in hiking gear, looking like a man prepared for an expedition, not a son greeting his father. He told me to pack a bag. He said we were going for a drive. He said the air in the city was too thick with dust and stress for my heart, and that I needed the pine-scented air of the mountains to heal. It was not a suggestion. It was an order wrapped in the thin plastic of concern. I sat in the passenger seat of his SUV as we drove north. The silence in the car was heavy enough to crush bone. I watched the city fade in the rearview mirror, replaced by the towering redwoods and winding roads of the county line. I reached for my pocket to check the time, but my hand met empty fabric. Kendrick had confiscated my phone before we left the driveway. He called it a digital detox. He said the doctor recommended 0 screen time to lower my cortisol levels. I knew the truth. He was cutting the lines of communication. He was severing the wire before he cut the throat. We arrived at the cabin 2 hours later. It was a small A-frame structure sitting on the edge of a stagnant lake. It belonged to Courtney's family. It was isolated. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away through dense forest. Kendrick carried my small bag inside. The air in the cabin was stale, smelling of damp wood and mouse droppings. He He showed me to the back room. It had a single window looking out at the dense tree line and a heavy wooden door. "Rest here, Dad," he said. "I am going to chop some wood for the fire. We will grill some burgers later." Just like old times. He walked out and closed the door. I waited for the latch to click. But it didn't click. It turned. He had locked me in from the outside. I tried the handle. It was rigid. I was not a guest. I was a prisoner. I sat on the edge of the dusty bed and listened to the sound of his axe hitting wood outside. Thwack, thwack, thwack. He was building a fire, but he was also building an alibi. If anyone asked, he was taking his sick father for a weekend retreat while his wife handled the messy business of legal filings back in the city. Dinner came on a tray, a burger burnt on the outside and raw in the middle. Kendrick unlocked the door just long enough to slide it in, avoiding my eyes. He looked manic, his movements jerky. He mumbled something about me needing rest and locked the door again. I looked at the tray. There was a plastic cup of water, the burger, and a single metal spoon for the coleslaw. I picked up the spoon. It was cheap stainless steel, stamped and thin. To most people, it was a utensil. To a man who spent 30 years fixing turbines, it was a lever. Night fell like a hammer. The cabin went dark. I heard Kendrick snoring in the main room. He had drunk enough whiskey to sedate a horse. This was my window. I moved the heavy dresser away from the door. It scraped against the floor, but the sound was masked by the wind howling through the trees outside. I knelt by the door hinges. They were old brass hinges painted over a dozen times. The pins were rusted in place. I took the spoon. I wedged the handle under the head of the top hinge pin. I applied pressure. The spoon bent. I adjusted my grip. I used the heel of my hand to hammer the bowl of the spoon, driving the handle deeper into the gap. Pain shot up my arm, radiating from my healing heart, but I pushed it down. I thought about the blueprints in the trash. I thought about Edda's rose garden being paved over. I thought about the smirk on Courtney's face. The anger gave me strength. With a grunt that I swallowed before it could escape my lips, I twisted the spoon. The paint cracked. The pin popped up an inch. I pulled it out with my fingers, ignoring the rust that cut into my skin. 1 down, 2 to go. It took me an hour to remove the bottom 2 pins. My hands were bleeding, my breath was ragged. I gripped the handle of the door and pulled it gently toward me, careful not to let it fall outward and crash. The heavy wood separated from the frame. I slipped through the gap like a shadow. I was in the hallway. Kendrick was asleep on the couch, an empty bottle on the floor beside him. His keys were on the table, but I could not take the car. The gravel driveway was too loud. The engine starting would wake him instantly. And he was younger than me. Faster. If he caught me, he would physically restrain me. I could not risk a confrontation. I had to go on foot. I slipped out the back door into the freezing night air. The forest was pitch black. I didn't have a flashlight. I didn't have a coat. I only had the flannel shirt on my back and the fire in my belly. I knew there was a gas station on the main highway about 3 miles east, 3 miles through uneven terrain, roots and rocks. I started walking. The cold bit into my bones. Every step sent a shockwave through my arthritic knees. Branches whipped my face, leaving stinging welts. I stumbled over a root and fell hard onto the wet earth. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I lay there in the mud, staring up at the sliver of moon through the canopy. My chest tightened. My heart fluttered a terrifying, erratic rhythm. The doctor's voice echoed in my head. No stress, no exertion. I could stay here. I could lie in the dirt and let the cold take me. It would be easier. Then I saw Edda's face. I saw her standing on the porch of our house, waving at me as I came home from the shipyard. I saw the pride in her eyes when we paid off the mortgage. She had worked double shifts at the diner to help us buy that house. She had scrubbed floors so our son could have clean clothes. I would not let them sell her legacy for a gambling debt. I pushed myself up. I forced my legs to move. Left foot, breathe, left foot, right foot, breathe. I walked for what felt like an eternity. I hallucinated in the dark. I thought I saw wolves. I thought I saw my father, but I kept moving. Finally, through the trees, I saw a light. It was the neon sign of the gas station. It flickered and buzzed, a beacon of civilization. I stumbled out of the tree line and onto the asphalt. The station was closed for the night, dark and abandoned. But there, on the side of the building, was a payphone, a relic of the past just like me. I patted my pockets. I had no money, no coins. I picked up the receiver. There was a dial tone. I dialed 0 for the operator. "Collect call," I rasped. "To David Strickland." The operator connected me. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. It was 3 in the morning. Pick up David. Please pick up. Hello, a groggy voice answered. David, I said. It is Solomon. Solomon. David sounded confused, then alarmed. Where are you? I have been trying to call your cell all day. Courtney sent over a draft of the guardianship filing. It is a bloodbath, Solomon. They have an affidavit from Dr. Evans saying you are incapacitated. I am not incapacitated, I said, leaning against the cold brick wall to keep from collapsing. I escaped. I am at a gas station on Route 9, but that does not matter. David, you have to stop them. You have to file an injunction. I can't. David said, his voice grim. Not on a Sunday. The courts are closed. By the time they open on Monday at 9, Courtney will be standing there with the doctor's note. The clerk will stamp it before I can even file a motion. Once they have temporary guardianship, they can freeze everything. They can block any transfer you try to make. There has to be a way, I pleaded. There is only one way, David said. You have to transfer the property before they file. You have to do it electronically. The county recorder system accepts digital filings 24/7. But Solomon, you need your RSA token, the digital key we set up for your trust fund last year. I closed my eyes. The token. It was a small black device that generated a random 6-digit code every 60 seconds. Without it, I could not access the secure portal. Where is the token, Solomon? David asked. It is in the safe, I whispered. In the house. There was a silence on the line. A heavy final silence. Solomon, David said gently, you cannot go back there. If Kendrick finds you, he will lock you up until the hearing. You are safe where you are. Let me come pick you up. We will fight this in court later. We might lose the house, but at least you will be free. Lose the house. No, I said. I am not losing the house. Solomon, don't be a hero. You are 69 years old. You have a bad heart. My heart is fine, David. I lied. It is the rest of me that is angry. I hung up the phone. I stood there under the flickering neon light. I was cold. I was exhausted. I was 3 hours away from home. And the only thing that could save me was locked in a steel box in the belly of the beast. I looked at the highway. A lone trucker was driving south heading toward the city. I stepped out to the edge of the road and stuck out my thumb. I wasn't running away anymore. I was going back. I was going to break into my own house. I was going to steal back my own life. And God help anyone who stood in my way. The taxi driver looked at me in the rearview mirror with suspicion. I did not blame him. It was 1 a.m. on a Sunday. I was an old man in a flannel shirt covered in mud from a 3-mile hike through the woods asking to be dropped off a block away from a Victorian house in a gentrified neighborhood. I paid him with the emergency cash I kept in my sock and waited for the taillights to disappear around the corner. The street was silent. The fog was rolling in off the bay, wrapping the streetlights in halos of mist. I looked at my house. It loomed in the darkness, a silhouette against the gray sky. It looked different now. Cold. Unwelcoming. But it was still mine. For at least another 8 hours, it was still mine. I did not go to the front door. My key would work, but the heavy oak door groaned on its hinges and the sound would echo through the hallway like a gunshot. I did not go to the back door either. Kendrick had installed a motion sensor light there last week, paranoid about the very people he was trying to displace. I went to the side of the house where the hydrangeas used to be before Courtney ripped them out. I knelt in the wet dirt. My knees screamed in protest, a sharp grinding pain that shot up my thighs, but I gritted my teeth. I pushed aside a stack of old bricks to reveal a small square wooden panel. It was the access hatch to the crawl space. I had built this hatch 40 years ago. Back then, I used it to store my homemade wine when the basement got too warm in the summer. Etta used to call it my bootlegger tunnel. I never thought I would be using it to break into my own home to steal back my life. I pried the panel open. The air that rushed out smelled of dry earth and old redwood. I slid inside, dragging my body over the rough dirt. It was tight, tighter than I remembered. Or maybe I was just stiffer. Spiderwebs brushed against my face like invisible fingers. I crawled on my elbows, army style, inching my way toward the vent that opened up behind the living room sofa. Above me, I could hear the house breathing. I heard the refrigerator cycling on. I heard the wind rattling the loose pane in the attic window. I reached the vent cover. It was an old cast-iron grill, heavy and solid. I pushed up on it gently. It shifted. I lifted it aside, my muscles trembling with the effort to keep it from clanging against the floor. I pulled myself up. My head emerged from the floor behind the large leather sectional. The room was bathed in the flickering blue light of the television. Courtney was there. She was sprawled on the sofa, a half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table, her mouth slightly open in deep sleep. The television was on mute, playing an infomercial for a blender. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was terrified she would hear it. Thump, thump, thump. I froze. I watched her chest rise and fall. She shifted, mumbling something in her sleep, and her hand flopped over the edge of the sofa inches from my face. I held my breath until my lungs burned. She settled back into rhythm. I slowly pulled the rest of my body out of the hole. I stood up, my joints popping softly. I was a ghost in my own living room. I crept past her, stepping only on the parts of the Persian rug that covered the solid beams. I moved into the hallway and toward the study. The door was closed. I turned the knob with agonizing slowness, praying the latch was well oiled. It turned silently. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. I did not turn on the light. I knew this room by heart. I walked to the built-in bookshelf on the north wall. I reached behind the third row of encyclopedias and found the false back. I pulled it forward. There it was, the wall safe. It was a sturdy digital model I had installed 10 years ago. I stared at the keypad. The red light blinked at me in the dark. Kendrick had the combination. He had demanded it 2 days ago when they started gathering the financial documents. I prayed to every ancestor I had that his arrogance had made him lazy. I prayed he hadn't bothered to change the code because he thought I was too feeble to ever access it again. I raised my shaking hand. I typed in the 6 digits, the date I proposed to Etta. The light turned green. The solenoid clicked. "Thank you, Kendrick," I whispered. "Thank you for being exactly the careless man I feared you were." I opened the heavy door. The safe was nearly empty. The cash was gone. My gold watch was gone. The deed to the house was gone, likely in Courtney's purse, ready for the morning filing. But in the back, tucked into a small velvet pouch, was the RSA security token. I grabbed it. I sat down at the desk and woke up the computer. The screen flooded the room with light, and I winced, quickly dimming the brightness. I navigated to the Alameda County Clerk Recorder's online portal. My fingers flew across the keyboard. This was the moment. This was the point of no return. I logged into my account. The system asked for the 2-factor authentication code. I pressed the button on the token. The numbers flashed. 842910. I typed them in. Access granted. I went to the transfer section. The screen asked me to select the type of deed. I did not choose sale. I did not choose quitclaim to family member. I scrolled down and selected gift deed. A gift deed transfers ownership immediately without money changing hands. It is a donation. It is final. I filled in the recipient field. My hands were steady now. The anger had crystallized into pure focus. I did not type Kendrick Hayes. I typed the name of the only entity I knew would respect the wood and stone of this house. African American Historical Preservation Society of Oakland. I uploaded the pre-scanned digital notary seal I kept on my encrypted drive for consulting work. I checked the box for immediate recording. I checked the box for irrevocable transfer. The screen asked for a final confirmation. Are you sure you want to transfer this property? This action cannot be undone. I looked at the blueprint of the luxury condos I had found in the trash. I looked at the memory of Etta's rose garden. I looked at the future my son had planned for me in a warehouse for the dying. I clicked confirm. A spinning wheel appeared on the screen. It spun for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, then a green check mark. Transaction recorded, 2:12 a.m. Owner of record updated. I sat back in the chair. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for days. It was done. I was penniless. I was homeless technically, but I had won. The house was now a historical asset. It could never be torn down. It could never be flipped. And most importantly, Kendrick and Courtney could not sell what they did not own. I shut down the computer. I placed the token back in the safe and locked it. I wanted them to find it there. I wanted them to wonder how it happened. I stood up to leave. It was 2:15 a.m. I walked back through the hallway. As I passed the living room, I stopped. Courtney was still asleep on the sofa, dreaming of the money she would never see. On the wall above her head hung a painting of a lighthouse. It was a cheap print she had bought to replace Etta's portrait, which she said was too gloomy. The painting was perfectly straight. Courtney was obsessed with symmetry. She measured the distance between frames with a ruler. I reached out. I tilted the painting 3 inches to the left. It hung there, crooked, jarring, wrong. I smiled. It was petty. It was small. But it was my signature. When she woke up, she would see it. She would feel that itch in her brain that something was off. She would know deep down in her gut that order had been disturbed. I slipped back into the crawl space, pulling the grate back into place over my head. I crawled back through the dirt, back through the tunnel of my past, and out into the cold night air. I was dirty. I was exhausted. But as I walked away from the house, leaving the crooked picture and the digital bomb ticking on the county server, I felt lighter than I had in years. The sun was coming up soon, and it was going to shed light on a very different world than the one my son expected. The sun was not yet up when I made it back to the cabin. The forest was wrapped in a thick gray mist that chilled the sweat on my skin. My legs felt like lead pipes. My chest ached with every breath, a dull throb reminding me that I was an old man pushing his body past its warranty. But my mind was sharp. My mind was a steel trap that had just snapped shut. I reached the back door of the cabin. It was still ajar, exactly how I had left it. I slipped inside. The air in the hallway was still stagnant, smelling of the whiskey Kendrick had drowned himself in the night before. I moved to the bedroom door. The heavy wooden slab was leaning against the frame where I had propped it. My hands were shaking as I picked up the spoon I had used as a pry bar. I dropped to my knees. The floorboards groaned and I froze, listening. From the living room came a snort, then the shifting of weight on the sofa. Kendrick was still asleep. I worked quickly. I aligned the hinges. I pushed the rusted pins back in. I used the heel of my boot to hammer them down, wrapping the boot in a towel to muffle the sound. It was the most delicate mechanical work I had ever done. When the last pin slid into place, I leaned back against the wall and closed my eyes. I was back in my cell, but now I held the key. I crawled into the dusty bed, pulling the thin quilt up to my chin. I did not sleep. I watched the light change against the window. I watched the darkness turn to gray, then to a pale, watery blue. I lay there and rehearsed my lines. I had to be the defeated father. I had to be the broken man they expected to find. At 8 o'clock, the lock tumbled. Kendrick pushed the door open. He looked terrible. His eyes were puffy, his skin sallow. He held a cup of coffee in a trembling hand. "Rise and shine, Dad." He mumbled, his voice rough. "We are leaving in an hour. Courtney is meeting us at the diner on the highway. She wants to make sure we are on schedule." I sat up slowly, feigning a stiffness that was actually quite real. I looked at him with dull, empty eyes. "Okay, son," I whispered. "I am ready to go home." He didn't look at me. He couldn't. He turned and walked away, leaving the door open. He didn't need to lock it anymore. He thought my spirit was broken. He didn't know that while he was sleeping off a hangover, I had surgically removed his inheritance. The drive to the diner was silent. Kendrick played the radio loud, drowning out the need for conversation. When we pulled into the parking lot, Courtney's white Mercedes was already there, gleaming like a shark in a swimming pool. She was waiting for us in a booth, tapping her long red nails against the Formica table. She looked fresh, sharp, and predatory. "Well, look who survived the wilderness," she said as we sat down. She did not ask how I was. She looked at Kendrick. "Is he ready?" Kendrick nodded, sliding into the booth next to her. "He is fine. He just slept." "Good," Courtney said. She signaled the waitress. "Coffee, black, and bring the check. We are in a hurry." We got back on the road. This time I was in the back seat of Courtney's car. The leather was soft, smelling of new money. Kendrick drove his car behind us. Courtney was in a mood to talk. She was high on adrenaline and greed. She adjusted the rearview mirror so she could see me, but she wasn't talking to me. She was talking at me. "You know Solomon?" She said, her eyes meeting mine in the reflection. "You are going to be much happier in Fresno. The facility has a garden. Well, a courtyard with some potted plants. It is low maintenance, just like you need." I stared out the window. The trees were blurring past. We were descending from the mountains, heading back toward the bay, back toward the battlefield. I didn't answer her. My silence seemed to encourage her. She turned on the Bluetooth speaker and dialed a number. "Hey, Jessica," she chirped. "No, I am driving back now." "Yes, it is done, basically. We file tomorrow morning. Listen, I need you to put a hold on that Birkin bag we saw last week, the orange one with the gold hardware." "Yes, I know it is 20,000, but by Tuesday afternoon I will be liquid. very liquid. She laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. I am treating myself, Jess. I earned this. Dealing with this family drama has been exhausting. I deserve a little luxury, and maybe a trip to St. Tropez. Kendrick wants to pay off some bills, but I say we need to celebrate first. I sat there and listened to her spend the money she thought she was extracting from my bones. She talked about bags. She talked about first-class tickets. She talked about tearing down my front porch to expand the driveway for her car. I looked at the back of her head. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her neck was slender. She had no idea that the digital deed I had filed 6 hours ago was a guillotine blade hanging right above that neck. "It is nice to have dreams, Courtney," I said softly. She paused her conversation. She looked in the mirror again, surprised I had spoken. "What was that, Solomon?" "I said it is nice to have dreams," I repeated. "Dreams keep us going." She rolled her eyes and went back to her call. "Yeah," he is mumbling again. "Just senile ramblings. Anyway, make sure they hold the bag." I smiled. A small, tight smile that she couldn't see. "Go ahead, Courtney. Order the bag, book the flight, climb as high as you want. The fall will only be more spectacular." We arrived at the house in the early afternoon. The crooked picture in the hallway was exactly where I had left it. Courtney walked right past it. She was too busy texting to notice. She was too busy counting her chickens before the eggs had even been laid. The rest of Sunday passed in a blur of activity. Courtney was on the phone with the movers scheduling the truck for Wednesday. Kendrick was in the garage sorting through boxes of tools he planned to sell. I sat in the basement in my chair listening to the symphony of their arrogance. Dinner was served at 7. It was another performative meal. Courtney had ordered takeout from an expensive Italian restaurant. She laid out the food on the dining table, transferring it from plastic containers to my good china to make it look homemade. "Sit down, Solomon," she commanded. "We should have a nice family dinner. It is your last night in the house after all." My last night. I sat down. Kendrick poured wine for himself and Courtney. He didn't offer me any. He poured me a glass of tap water. "To new chapters," Courtney said, raising her glass. "To new chapters," Kendrick echoed, his voice hollow. I picked up my water glass. The condensation was cold against my fingertips. I looked at them. I looked at my son, the boy who used to sit in this very chair and tell me about his science fair projects. I looked at the woman who had turned him into a stranger. "I have a toast," I said. Courtney paused her glass halfway to her lips. She looked annoyed, but she nodded. "Make it quick, Solomon." I stood up. My knees didn't hurt anymore. My back was straight. I looked around the room. I looked at the walls painted gray. I looked at the empty spot where my record player used to be. "I want to thank you both," I said. My voice was steady. It filled the room. "You have shown me what is truly important. You have shown me the value of legacy. You have shown me that a house is just wood and brick, but a home is something you carry inside you." Kendrick looked down at his plate. He shifted in his seat. I raised my glass higher. "Congratulations," I said. "Tomorrow your lives will change forever. You have made plans. You have calculated the numbers. You think you know what the future holds. But life has a way of correcting the balance. Tomorrow you will get exactly what you deserve." Courtney smiled. It was a smug, victorious smile. She thought I was capitulating. She thought I was giving them my blessing. "Thank you, Solomon," she said, taking a sip of her wine. "That was surprisingly lucid of you. We will make sure you are comfortable in Fresno. We will visit, maybe at Christmas." She didn't mean it. I knew she didn't mean it. I drank my water. It tasted clean. It tasted like truth. I finished my meal in silence. I watched them eat. I watched Courtney wipe sauce from her lip. I watched Kendrick check his phone under the table. They were ghosts. They were walking dead people eating a meal in a house that no longer belonged to their bloodline. "Go to bed," Solomon Courtney said when the meal was done. "We have an early start. The court hearing is at 9. We need you to look presentable. Wear the suit Kendrick laid out for you." I stood up. I pushed my chair in. "Good night, Kendrick," I said. "Night, Dad," he mumbled. "Good night, Courtney." She didn't answer. She was already clearing the table, stacking the plates loudly. I walked to the basement door. I descended into the dark. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't need to. I lay down on my cot. Above me, I heard their footsteps. I heard them laughing. I heard them celebrating the victory they thought they had won. Let them sleep. Let them dream of money and Hermes bags. I closed my eyes. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tock, tick, tock. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. The bomb was primed, the fuse was burning, and I was the only one who could hear the countdown. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The air was thick with a cold, damp mist that clung to the windows of the car, but inside Courtney's Mercedes, the climate control was set to a perfect 70 degrees. She was humming. It was a tune I did not recognize, something pop and upbeat that sounded jarring against the grim reality of where we were headed. We were going to the Alameda County Courthouse. To her, it was a bank vault she was about to crack open. To me, it was the execution chamber where she planned to end my life as a free man. I sat in the back seat wearing my Sunday suit. It felt loose on my shoulders. I had lost weight in the last month, the stress of the heart attack and the betrayal eating away at my muscle mass. But as I smoothed the fabric over my knees, I felt a strange calm. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I looked at Kendrick in the passenger seat. He was staring out the window, biting his fingernails. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, even though he thought he was the executioner. He knew what they were doing was wrong. He knew it in his gut. But he was too weak to stop the train his wife was driving. We parked in the garage. Courtney checked her makeup in the rearview mirror one last time. She applied a fresh coat of red lipstick, pressing her lips together with a satisfied pop. She looked sharp, predatory. She was wearing a white suit that cost more than my first car. She looked like justice if justice had a price tag. "Let us get this over with," she said, grabbing her briefcase. "The judge is expecting the filing by 9:15. We need to get the clerk to stamp the asset freeze first." We walked into the courthouse. The building was a cavernous space of marble and echo. It smelled of floor wax and desperation. I walked slowly, leaning heavily on the cane I did not really need. I wanted to play the part. I wanted the cameras to see a frail old man being led by his dutiful family. We reached the clerk's window at exactly 9 o'clock. The woman behind the glass was middle-aged, with tired eyes and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her name tag read Mrs. Higgins. She looked like she had seen every variety of human misery this city had to offer. Courtney stepped up to the window. She placed her leather briefcase on the counter with a heavy thud. She smiled, but it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a customer demanding to speak to the manager. "Good morning," Courtney said, her voice projecting authority. "I am here to file an emergency guardianship petition for Mr. Solomon Hayes. We also have a quitclaim deed that needs to be recorded immediately to secure assets for his medical care." She slid the stack of papers under the glass partition. Mrs. Higgins didn't smile back. She pulled the stack toward her. She licked her thumb and began to flip through the pages. "I need your identification," she said flatly. "And his." Courtney handed over our IDs. Mrs. Higgins typed something into her computer. The sound of the keys clacking echoed in the quiet hall. Click, clack, click, clack. It sounded like bones breaking. I stood behind Courtney, watching the screen reflected in the glass partition. I saw my name appear. I saw a loading bar. Mrs. Higgins stopped typing. She frowned. She squinted at the screen, then looked down at the papers Courtney had given her. She pushed her glasses up her nose and typed again, harder this time, as if the force of her fingers could change the data. "Is there a problem?" Courtney asked, tapping her nails on the counter. "We are in a bit of a rush. We have a hearing upstairs." Mrs. Higgins did not answer. She picked up her phone and dialed a 3-digit extension. "Supervisor to window 4, she said into the receiver. "We have a code 10 mismatch on a property title." Courtney stiffened. Her back went rigid. "What do you mean mismatch? I have the original deed right here. My father-in-law signed it on Friday. It is notarized." The supervisor arrived. He was a tall man with a bald head and a face like a bulldog. He leaned over Mrs. Higgins' shoulder and looked at the screen. He nodded slowly. He looked at Courtney, then at me, then back at the screen. "Ma'am," the supervisor said, his voice deep and bored. "We cannot record this quitclaim deed." "Excuse me," Courtney's voice went up an octave. "Why not?" "It is perfectly legal," because the supervisor said, sliding the papers back under the glass. "Mr. Solomon Hayes does not hold title to the property listed in this document." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off before the screaming starts. Courtney laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That is impossible. He has owned that house for 40 years. I have the title insurance policy right here. Check your system again. You must have the wrong parcel number. The supervisor turned the monitor around so we could see it. I am looking at the live registry, ma'am. The property at 1402 Oak Street was transferred yesterday. Transferred, Courtney whispered. The color was draining from her face beneath the makeup. Transferred to whom? The supervisor pointed to a line on the screen. It says here the current owner is the African American Historical Preservation Society of Oakland. The transaction was a gift deed. It was recorded electronically at 2:12 a.m. on Sunday morning. Courtney stared at the screen. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. She looked at the timestamp. 2:12 a.m. Sunday morning, she stammered. That is not possible. She spun around and pointed a shaking finger at me. He couldn't have done it. She screamed. Her voice echoed off the marble walls, causing people in the line behind us to step back. He was locked in a cabin. We took him to the lake. He didn't have a phone. He didn't have a computer. Kendrick grabbed her arm. Courtney, stop. People are staring. I don't care. She pulled away from him. This is fraud. This is identity theft. Someone hacked the system. Look at him. Look at this old man. He can't even use an iPad. He doesn't know his own password. How could he transfer a deed at 2 a.m. when he was locked in a bedroom 50 miles away? The supervisor raised an eyebrow. Locked in a bedroom, Ma'am Courtney froze. She realized what she had just said. She realized she had just admitted to false imprisonment in front of 2 officers of the court. I mean, he was resting, she stuttered, trying to backtrack. He was staying with us. Under our supervision. He did not leave our sight. Then the transaction is valid, the supervisor said, pulling the monitor back. The system uses a 2-factor biometric authentication and a secure RSA token. It is impossible to forge. If the token was used, then the owner authorized it. Courtney slammed her hand on the counter. I want to see the manager. I want this frozen. I am filing a police report right now. You are all incompetent, ma'am. You need to lower your voice, the supervisor warned. No, I will not lower my voice. That house is mine. I have a buyer waiting. I have a contract. The double doors at the entrance of the hall swung open. A man walked in. He was wearing a gray suit that was cut sharper than a diamond. He carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had been to war and won. He walked with a rhythm that commanded attention. It was David Strickland. I turned and looked at him. We locked eyes. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. David walked straight up to the counter, stepping between me and the hysterical woman who used to be my daughter-in-law. He placed a heavy hand on the marble countertop. Good morning, Mrs. Higgins, David said. His voice was calm, baritone, and sounded like gravel rolling in a drum. Mr. Strickland. Mrs. Higgins nodded, looking relieved to see a professional. I believe there is some confusion regarding my client's assets, David said. He pulled a file from his briefcase. He did not look at Courtney. He acted as if she were a noisy ventilation fan. He handed a document to the supervisor. Here is the notarized affidavit of the transfer, David said, along with the digital trail log from the secure server. As you can see, Mr. Hayes executed his right to donate his property to a charitable organization. The society has already accepted the gift. The title is clear. Courtney lunged forward, trying to grab the papers from David's hand. You, she shrieked. You helped him. You conspired with him. This is malpractice. David turned to face her slowly. He looked her up and down with cold clinical detachment. Mrs. Hayes, David said, I would be very careful about the accusations you are throwing around in a court of law, especially considering you just admitted to holding a senior citizen against his will without a court order. Courtney's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. Her hands were curled into claws. He is incompetent, she yelled. He has dementia. He doesn't know what he signed. We have a doctor's note. David pulled another paper from his file. If you are referring to Dr. Evans, David said you might want to check the news. The medical board suspended his license this morning pending an investigation into selling false diagnoses. I don't think his note is worth the paper it is printed on anymore. Kendrick let out a small, strangled sound. He sank onto a bench near the wall, putting his head in his hands. He knew. He finally understood the scope of the disaster. But Courtney was not done. She was a fighter, I will give her that. A dirty fighter, but a fighter. The house is marital property, she hissed. Kendrick has rights. He is the heir. Kendrick has rights to his inheritance when his father passes. David corrected her. But Solomon is very much alive, and since the property was transferred as a gift, not a sale, there are no proceeds to claim. The value of the estate is now zero. Zero. The word hung in the air. Courtney stared at David, then she stared at the clerk. Then she slowly turned her head and stared at me. I was standing there leaning on my cane. I wasn't looking at the floor anymore. I was looking right at her. I straightened my back. I took a deep breath. "It is over, Courtney," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise of the courthouse like a laser. "You didn't just lose the house. You lost everything." She looked at me with pure hatred. Her lips peeled back from her teeth. "You old bastard," she whispered. "I will sue you. I will drag you through every court in this state. I will leave you to rot in the street." David stepped in front of me, shielding me from her venom. "I don't think you will be suing anyone, Mrs. Hayes," David said. "Because if you don't walk out of this building right now, I am going to walk down the hall to the district attorney's office and file charges for elder abuse, attempted fraud, and false imprisonment. And I have the recording of your phone call from the diner yesterday where you discussed spending the money you hadn't stolen yet." Courtney froze. Her eyes went wide. How do you have that? Solomon isn't the only one who knows how to use technology," David said dryly. Courtney looked at Kendrick. Kendrick didn't look up. He was crying silently into his hands. She looked around the room. People were watching. The security guard was taking a step toward her, his hand resting on his belt. She realized she was cornered. The walls of her ambition had collapsed and she was standing in the rubble. She grabbed her briefcase. She didn't say another word. She spun on her heel and marched toward the exit, her heels clicking a furious, retreating rhythm. She didn't wait for Kendrick. She didn't look back. I watched her go. I watched the white suit disappear through the revolving doors. I looked at Kendrick. He was still sitting on the bench. He looked like a small boy who had lost his mother in a supermarket. David put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, Solomon?" I looked at my lawyer, my friend. "I am tired, David," I said. "I am very tired." "Let's get you some coffee," he said. "Real coffee, not that swill they serve here." We walked toward the exit. I stopped in front of Kendrick. He looked up at me. His eyes were red and swollen. "Dad," he whispered. I didn't mean." I looked at him. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness. "You knew, son," I said softly. "You just didn't care until you got caught." I walked past him. I walked out into the cool morning air. The mist was lifting. The sun was trying to break through the clouds. I didn't have a house anymore. I didn't have a family anymore. But as I stood on the courthouse steps taking the first breath of my new life, I realized something. I was free. The drive back from the courthouse was a funeral procession for Courtney's ambitions. She drove fast, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, muttering to herself like a woman possessed. Kendrick sat in the passenger seat, staring blankly at the dashboard, a man whose soul had been hollowed out by his own greed. I sat in the back watching the familiar streets of Oakland roll by. I felt a strange lightness in my chest. For the first time in months, the crushing weight of their schemes was gone. I was no longer a victim. I was a spectator to their inevitable collision with reality. We pulled into the driveway of the house, but we were not alone. A large dark blue van was parked by the curb. On the side, painted in gold letters, were the words, "African American Historical Preservation Society of Oakland." Two people were standing on the front lawn examining the porch railing with clipboards in hand. One was a tall woman with silver dreadlocks and a posture that commanded respect. The other was a younger man taking photos of the eaves. Courtney slammed the car door shut and marched toward them. She looked like a soldier charging into a battle she had already lost but refused to surrender. "Excuse me," she shouted, waving her arms. "You are trespassing. Get off my property immediately." The woman with the dreadlocks turned slowly. She lowered her clipboard and looked at Courtney over the rim of her glasses. She did not look intimidated. She looked bored. "I assume you must be Mrs. Hayes," the woman said. Her voice was cool and measured. "I am Mrs. Gable, the director of the Preservation Society, and we are not trespassing. We are inspecting our new acquisition." Courtney stopped a few feet away from her, her chest heaving. "This is a mistake," Courtney spat. "My father-in-law is mentally unstable. The transfer is being contested. We are filing an injunction this afternoon, so take your little clipboards and get off my land before I call the police." Mrs. Gable smiled. It was a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. "You are welcome to call the police, Mrs. Hayes. In fact, I would encourage it. It would establish a record of your harassment. But as for the title, it is clear. The deed was recorded, verified, and accepted. This house is now officially designated as a cultural heritage site." She gestured to the house, sweeping her hand across the facade I had painted 3 times in 40 years. "Do you know what that means, Mrs. Hayes?" Mrs. Gable asked. "I don't care what it means," Courtney screamed. "It means nothing, because I am going to overturn it. It means," Mrs. Gable continued, ignoring the interruption, "that this structure is now protected by state and federal preservation laws. It cannot be demolished. It cannot be significantly altered. The facade must remain in its original Victorian condition. Your plans to build condos here, they are legally impossible. You could not get a permit to tear down this porch if you bribed every official in City Hall. This house stands as a monument to the black working class of Oakland, and it will stand here long after you are gone." I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway. I leaned on my cane, listening to the beautiful sound of Mrs. Gable's words. They were not just rules, they were armor. My house was wearing a bulletproof vest. Courtney stared at the house. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The reality was sinking in. The bulldozers were never coming. The luxury apartments were smoke. The payday was gone. "But wait," Courtney said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Even if you own it, we live here. We have residency. You have to evict us. That takes months. You can't just throw us out." Mrs. Gable looked at me. Her expression softened. She stepped forward and extended her hand. "Mr. Hayes," she said warmly, "it is an honor to meet you. Thank you for your incredible generosity. The society is indebted to you." I shook her hand. It was a strong, firm grip. "The honor is mine, Mrs. Gable," I said. "I just wanted to make sure history was preserved." Mrs. Gable turned back to Courtney. She pulled a document from her clipboard. "Regarding residency," she said, "you are correct that eviction is a legal process. However, the deed of gift contains a very specific clause. It is a standard stipulation for living donors who wish to remain in their homes." She held the paper up so Courtney could read the bold text in the center of the page. "Mr. Solomon Hayes retains a life estate in the property," Mrs. Gable read aloud. "Furthermore, he is appointed as the permanent resident curator of the museum. This grants him exclusive rights to occupy the premises and sole discretion over the management of the interior space." She lowered the paper and looked Courtney dead in the eye. "That means, Mrs. Hayes, that Solomon is not a tenant. He is the master of the house. Legally, the society owns the bricks, but Solomon owns the keys. He decides who steps through that front door. He decides who sleeps in the bedrooms. And he decides who has to leave." Courtney turned to me. Her face was a mask of shock. She looked at the old man she had tried to lock in a basement. She looked at the man she had fed boiled chicken and silenced at the dinner table. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that she had never really known me at all. "Solomon," she said, her voice trembling. "You wouldn't. We are family. Kendrick is your son." I looked at Kendrick. He was standing by the car, unable to come closer. He looked like a ghost. I looked back at Courtney. "Family," I said. "That is a word you use when you want something, Courtney. You didn't treat me like family when you threw away Etta's records. You didn't treat me like family when you tried to lock me away in a facility in Fresno. You treated me like an obstacle." I walked past her. I walked up the steps to the porch. I stood in front of the heavy oak door. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my key ring. The keys jingled. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. "Mrs. Gable," I said, "I believe I need to secure the museum. There are some unauthorized persons on the premises who are disturbing the peace." Mrs. Gable nodded. "Of course, Mr. Curator. Do you need assistance removing them?" "I don't think that will be necessary," I said. But before I could put the key in the lock, a sound cut through the air. It was a ringtone, loud, jarring, and demanding. It was coming from Courtney's purse. She jumped as if she had been tasered. She fumbled with the bag, pulling out her phone. She looked at the screen, and the color drained from her face until she looked like a corpse. "It is Brad," she whispered. "The developer." "Answer it," I said. She stared at the phone. It kept ringing. "Answer it, Courtney," I said, my voice hard. "Tell him the good news." She tapped the screen with a shaking finger. She put the phone to her ear. "Hello, Brad." She didn't put it on speaker, but she didn't have to. Brad's voice was so loud I could hear it from the porch. "Courtney, where is the title transfer? I am at the bank right now. The wire is ready to go, but my title officer says there is a flag on the property. What is going on?" Courtney swallowed hard. There has been a complication, Brad. A small legal issue. We need a few more days to clear it up. A few more days, Brad roared. The contract said noon today, Courtney. Noon. It is 12:30. If you don't have clear title, you are in breach. Please, Brad, listen to me, Courtney begged. The old man, he pulled a stunt. He transferred it to a charity, but we can fix it. I just need time. You don't have time, Brad shouted. Do you know how much money I have leveraged on this deal? I have crews scheduled for tomorrow. I have permits pending. You told me this was a done deal. You told me the father was incompetent and out of the picture. He was. Courtney stammered, tears streaming down her face now. I am pulling out, Brad said. The deal is dead. And Courtney read page 5 of the contract. The penalty clause. No, Brad. Please. If the seller fails to deliver clear title due to willful negligence or fraud, the seller is liable for double the deposit amount as liquidated damages. You took a $50,000 deposit, Courtney. That means you owe me $100,000 by close of business today. Or I am slapping a lien on every asset you and your husband own. The line went dead. Courtney lowered the phone slowly. She stood there in the driveway, the silence of the neighborhood pressing in on her. She had gambled everything. She had spent the money in her head before it was in her hand. And now she wasn't just broke. She was ruined. Kendrick walked over to her. He had heard every word. $100,000, he whispered. Courtney, we don't have $100,000, we have $20,000 in savings. And the credit cards are maxed out from the renovation. Courtney looked at him. Her eyes were wild. Do something, Kendrick, she screamed, shoving him. Fix this. Talk to your father. Make him undo it. Kendrick looked at me. He looked at the father he had betrayed. He saw the way I stood on the porch flanked by the guardians of history. He saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't anger anymore. It was a wall, a high, impenetrable wall that he could never climb over again. I can't fix it, Courtney, Kendrick said quietly. Nobody can fix this. Courtney let out a scream of pure frustration. She threw her phone onto the pavement. It shattered, sending shards of glass skittering across the driveway. She fell to her knees, sobbing. Not tears of remorse. Tears of a spoiled child who had finally been told no. I turned the key in the lock. The bolt slid back with a heavy, satisfying thunk. I opened the door to my house. My museum. Mrs. Gable, I said. Would you like to come in? I have some wonderful tea in the kitchen, and I would love to show you the original blueprints. I believe I rescued them from the trash just in time. I stepped inside. I did not invite my son. I did not invite his wife. I closed the door on their weeping and their ruin. I walked into the hallway where the crooked picture still hung on the wall. I reached out and straightened it. Perfect balance. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full of memories. And now it was full of a future that belonged to everyone. I walked to the kitchen to put the kettle on. I had a lot of work to do. Being a curator is a big responsibility, and I was just getting started. The sound of a power drill shattering the morning silence was the final wake-up call for the Hayes dynasty. It was Tuesday morning. The air was crisp and smelled of impending rain, but inside the house the atmosphere was thick with the sour stench of defeat. I stood by the bay window in the living room watching the workmen outside. They were wearing uniforms with the Historical Society logo. 2 of them were holding a heavy rectangular object covered in a velvet cloth, while a third man drilled deep pilot holes into the siding of the house. Kendrick and Courtney were sitting on the floor amidst a sea of half-packed boxes. They looked like refugees in a war zone they had started. When the drilling started, Courtney jumped as if she had been shot. She scrambled to her feet, her hair matted and her eyes wild with lack of sleep. She ran to the window and saw what was happening. She saw the men anchoring the bolts. She saw the velvet cloth slip, revealing the gleam of polished bronze. She didn't scream. Not at first. She made a low, guttural sound in her throat, the sound of an animal that realizes it is trapped. Then she bolted for the front door. I did not try to stop her. I simply watched. She flew out onto this porch barefoot, wearing yesterday's designer clothes, which were now wrinkled and stained. She threw herself at the workman on the ladder. "Stop it! Get away from my house! Take it down!" She clawed at the ladder, shaking it violently. The workman shouted in alarm, dropping his drill. It clattered onto the porch steps, chipping the wood. Courtney lunged for the bronze plaque. She grabbed the edge of it, her fingernails scraping against the metal, trying to rip it from the wall before the bolts could be tightened. "This is mine. You cannot brand it. It is not a museum. It is a home." She was hysterical. She was scratching at the siding, peeling away the paint she had hated so much, trying to erase the reality that was being physically attached to the structure. Then a siren chirped. It wasn't a long wail, just a short, sharp burst of sound that cut through her frenzy. A police cruiser had pulled up to the curb. It was Officer Miller. I had known Miller since he was a rookie patrolling the beat. I had fixed his transmission for free back in '98 when the department budget was tight. He stepped out of the car, adjusting his belt. He didn't look like a friend today. He looked like the law. He walked up the driveway with slow, deliberate steps. Courtney froze her hand, still gripping the plaque. She looked at him panting, thinking perhaps he was here to save her. "Officer, thank God. These men are vandalizing my property. Arrest them." Miller stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at the workmen who were looking at him with wide eyes. He looked at the bronze plaque that read Solomon and Etta Hayes Memorial House. Then he looked at Courtney. "Mrs. Hayes, step away from the building." Courtney blinked. "What? No. You don't understand. I am the owner." Miller pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It was a copy of the deed transfer I had sent to the precinct that morning. According to the county registry, this property belongs to the Preservation Society. That plaque is registered public property. Attempting to remove or deface it is a felony under the Cultural Heritage Protection Act. Step away from the wall, or I will have to place you under arrest for vandalism and destruction of public property. Courtney's hand fell from the plaque. She looked at Miller. She looked at the gun on his hip. She looked at the house that had rejected her. "But I live here," she whispered. "You are a guest here," Ma'am Miller said coldly. "And guests do not destroy the host's property. Now go back inside and let these men finish their work." She collapsed. Not physically, but spiritually. Her shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of her, leaving only a hollow shell. She turned and walked back inside past me without making eye contact. She went back to her corner of the living room and sat down on a box of kitchen appliances. Outside, the drill started up again. It was a victorious sound. They tightened the bolts, they polished the bronze, and when they were done, my name and Etta's name were etched in metal, shielding the house forever. An hour later, a bus pulled up. It was a small shuttle bus painted with colorful murals of Oakland's history. The brakes hissed as it stopped in front of the house. The doors opened and a group of people stepped out. There were about 12 of them. Some were students with notebooks. Some were older folks from the neighborhood who remembered when Etta used to play piano on Sundays. They stood on the sidewalk looking up at the house with reverence. Courtney and Kendrick looked up from their misery. "Who are they?" Kendrick asked, his voice cracking. I adjusted my tie. I had put on my best suit. I picked up my cane not for support but for authority. "They are the public," I said, "and we are open for business." I walked to the front door and threw it open. The morning sun flooded the hallway, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I stepped out onto the porch. "Welcome," I called out. My voice was strong. It carried over the noise of the street. "Welcome to the Hayes house. Please come in." The group walked up the steps. They were respectful. They wiped their feet on the mat. They whispered in hushed tones, admiring the original stained glass in the doorframe. I led them into the foyer. This house was built in 1920. I began falling into the rhythm of a storyteller. It was purchased by my father in 1950, shortly after he returned from the war. It was one of the first houses in this district to be owned by a black family. I led them into the living room. The group followed me, their eyes wide, taking in the high ceilings and the crown molding. And then they saw the boxes. They saw the piles of clothes. They saw the half-eaten takeout containers on the floor. And they saw the two people sitting in the corner looking disheveled and terrified. Courtney pulled her knees to her chest, trying to hide behind a stack of magazines. Kendrick stared at the floor, his face burning with shame. They looked like squatters. They looked like intruders who had broken into a temple. The tour group stopped. The guests looked at me, then at the couple in the corner, then back at me. They were confused. They didn't know if this was part of the exhibit. I did not rush. I let the silence stretch. I let the guests look at them. I let Courtney feel the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes judging her. This was the woman who wanted to be the queen of society. Now she was an exhibit of failure. I cleared my throat. If you look to your left, you will see the original fireplace mantel hand-carved from local oak. My wife Etta used to decorate it with magnolias every spring. I continued the tour, walking right past Kendrick. I stepped over his legs as if he were a piece of discarded lumber. I talked about the architecture. I talked about the struggle to keep the house during the recession. I talked about the joy and the pain that the walls had witnessed. I erased them. By refusing to acknowledge them, I stripped them of their power. They were not the owners. They were not even residents. They were ghosts haunting a place that had moved on without them. One of the guests, a young woman with a camera, raised her hand. She pointed to the corner. "Excuse me, sir," she asked politely. Is that part of the history?" She was pointing at Courtney, who was now weeping silently into her hands. I stopped. I turned and looked at my son and his wife. I looked at them with the cold clinical detachment of a curator examining a damaged artifact that was no longer worth repairing. I smiled at the young woman. "Ah," I said. "No, I apologize for the mess." I walked over to where Kendrick was sitting. I stood over him. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for mercy. He wanted me to save him. He wanted me to tell these people that he was my son, that he belonged here. But he didn't belong here. He belonged to the world of transaction and greed, and this house was a sanctuary of memory. "These are just some uninvited guests," I said to the group, my voice loud and clear. "They are transient. They are in the process of being removed to make room for more valuable exhibits." I looked down at Kendrick. I dropped the curator persona for 1 second and let the father speak. But it was not the father he wanted. It was the father he deserved. "You have 1 hour," I said. My voice was low, meant only for him, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. 1 hour to remove your clutter from my museum. If you are still here when the next tour group arrives, I will have Officer Miller remove you as trespassers. And Kendrick, he is not as forgiving as I am. I turned back to the group. I clapped my hands together. "Now, if you will follow me to the dining room, I will show you the table where the local Civil Rights Committee used to meet in the 60s. It is a very special piece of history." I led the group away. Behind me, I heard the frantic rustling of cardboard boxes. I heard the sound of a zipper being pulled shut with desperate haste. I heard Courtney sobbing, telling Kendrick to hurry up. They were scrambling. They were running. For the first time in their lives, they were understanding that they were not the main characters of this story. They were just the dust that needed to be swept out the back door. I walked into the dining room holding my head high. I felt Etta walking beside me. She would have loved this. She would have loved seeing the house full of people who cared. And she would have agreed that sometimes to keep a house clean, you have to throw out the trash, even if it shares your last name. The tour group had only been gone for 10 minutes when the black SUV rolled up to the curb. It was not a shuttle bus. It was not a police cruiser. It was a vehicle with tinted windows and no license plates on the front bumper. 2 men stepped out. They were thick men wearing suits that strained at the shoulders. They did not look at the architecture. They did not look at the bronze plaque. They looked at Kendrick. Kendrick was standing on the lawn next to a pile of boxes he had just dragged out of the house. When he saw the men, he stopped moving. A box of kitchenware slipped from his hands and crashed onto the concrete walkway. The sound of shattering glass was the only noise on the street. The men walked up the driveway. They moved with the heavy, inevitable momentum of a landslide. Kendrick backed up until his legs hit the porch steps. He looked trapped. He looked like a small animal realizing that the fence was too high to jump. One of the men spoke. His voice was low and sounded like gravel grinding together. "Mr. Hayes, you have stopped answering our calls." Kendrick held up his hands. They were shaking so badly I could see the tremors from where I stood in the doorway. "Please, listen. There was a delay with the bank, just a clerical error. The wire is coming. I swear." The man shook his head slowly. "We called the bank Mr. Hayes. There is no wire, there is no escrow, there is no sale. You lied to us, and we do not like being lied to. We lent you $50,000 on a bridge loan because you said you had equity. Where is our equity?" Kendrick's eyes darted around wildly. He looked at the house. He looked at me standing in the doorway like a sentinel. "It is right here," he shouted, pointing at the building. "This is a $2 million property. My father, he is confused. We are sorting it out. Just give me another week." The man looked at me. He looked at the cane in my hand. He looked at the bronze plaque on the wall. "Is this true, sir?" the man asked me. "Are you selling this property?" I stepped forward. I did not step down to their level. I stayed on the porch looking down at them. "I am afraid you have been misinformed," I said. My voice was calm. It was the voice of a man who owes nothing to anyone. This property is a registered museum owned by the Historical Preservation Society. It is not for sale. It will never be for sale." Kendrick let out a strangled sob. "Dad, don't do this. Tell them. Tell them you will sign it over. They are going to hurt me." I looked at my son. I saw the terror in his eyes. A father's instinct is to protect, but a mechanic's instinct is to fix the root cause. Saving him now would only enable the disease to spread. "I cannot give you what isn't mine, Kendrick," I said. "I am just the curator. I am an employee of the society. I earn a salary of $1 a year. I have no assets. I have no authority to transfer deeds. You are on your own." The man in the suit turned back to Kendrick. He smiled, but it was a smile devoid of humor. "So you have no house, Mr. Hayes. That is unfortunate. But we still need our money." Kendrick fell to his knees. He grabbed the hem of the man's jacket. "I will pay you. I have money coming in. My wife, Courtney. She has assets. She has excellent credit. Take her car. Take her jewelry." Courtney had been standing near the garage trying to load a suitcase into the trunk of her Mercedes. When she heard her name, she froze. She walked over her heels, clicking angrily on the pavement. "What did you just say?" she hissed. Kendrick scrambled toward her. "Courtney, baby, please. Tell them. Tell them about your accounts. We can co-sign. We can work this out." The second man, the silent one, pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He handed it to Courtney. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, "we already have your accounts on file. Your husband used your personal information to secure the loan last month. He listed you as the primary guarantor. Since he has defaulted, the debt is now yours." Courtney stared at the paper. Her eyes scanned the document. She saw her social security number. She saw a signature that looked like hers, but wasn't. She looked up at Kendrick. The look on her face was not fear. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. "You forged my signature," she whispered. Kendrick stammered. I had to. It was just a formality. I knew we would pay it back once the house sold. I did it for us. Courtney, for our future, for us," she screamed. The sound tore through the quiet neighborhood. "You stole my identity. You ruined my credit. You dragged me into a loan with loan sharks." She dropped the paper. She lunged at him. It happened so fast. Courtney, the woman who prided herself on elegance and social standing, turned into a wild animal. She tackled Kendrick onto the grass. Her nails raked across his face. She was screaming words that would make a sailor blush. She was hitting him with her fist, with her purse, with anything she could reach. "You loser, you parasite, I hate you." Kendrick tried to defend himself, pushing her away, but she kept coming. The two thugs stepped back, watching with amusement. They didn't intervene. This wasn't their problem. This was just the entertainment. I watched from the porch. It was a tragedy, but it was a necessary one. The facade of their perfect marriage had finally cracked, revealing the rot underneath. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed 911. "Dispatch," I said calmly. "This is the curator of the Hayes Museum at 1402 Oak Street. I have a domestic disturbance on the front lawn. 2 individuals are fighting. It is violent. Please send a unit." I hung up. I stood there and waited. The sirens arrived 3 minutes later. Officer Miller was still in the neighborhood, likely expecting trouble. He pulled up, lights flashing. 2 other cruisers followed him. The police officers rushed onto the lawn. They pulled Courtney off of Kendrick. She was still screaming, kicking at the air. Her white suit was covered in grass stains and dirt. Her hair was a bird's nest. "Get off me!" she yelled at the officers. "Arrest him! He is a thief. He forged my signature. He is a fraud." The officers separated them. They stood Kendrick up. He was bleeding from a scratch on his cheek. He looked dazed. Officer Miller looked at me on the porch. He nodded. I nodded back. "All right, break it up," Miller said. "You are disturbing the peace. We are going to have to take you both in to sort this out." He began to pat Kendrick down, checking for weapons. It was standard procedure. Kendrick stood there, limp, defeated. "Wait," Miller said. He paused. He reached into Kendrick's jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. Inside were several white pills and a small packet of white powder. Kendrick's eyes went wide. "No, that isn't mine. I mean, it is for anxiety. I have a prescription. I just lost the bottle." Miller held the bag up to the light. "This looks like a controlled substance, Mr. Hayes, and this powder looks like cocaine." Kendrick started to hyperventilate. "No, please. I am stressed. My father, he is stealing my house. I just needed something to take the edge off." Miller spun Kendrick around. He pulled the handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click of the cuffs locking around my son's wrists echoed across the lawn. "Kendrick Hayes, you are under arrest for possession of a controlled substance disturbing the peace, and we will be investigating the fraud allegations your wife just made. You have the right to remain silent." They began to drag him toward the cruiser. Kendrick looked back at me. "Dad!" he screamed. "Dad, help me. Don't let them take me. This is a mistake. I am your son." I looked at him. I looked at the boy I had raised. I looked at the man who had called my neighbors criminals. I looked at the man who had called this neighborhood a slum. Now he was the criminal. He was the one being hauled away in cuffs while the neighbors stood on their porches and watched. Mrs. Johnson next door shook her head, clutching her shawl. Mr. Henderson across the street stood with his arms crossed, his face grim. They saw justice. I did not step off the porch. I did not offer bail money. I did not call a lawyer. "I am just the curator," I whispered to myself. "And I am removing the trash from the exhibit." The police pushed Kendrick into the back of the car. Courtney was shoved into the second cruiser, still weeping about her credit score. The thugs had vanished the moment the sirens appeared, slipping away into the shadows to collect their debt. Another way, another day. The cruisers pulled away. The sirens wailed, fading into the distance. Silence returned to Oak Street. I stood there for a long time. The grass was torn up where they had fought. The box of broken glass still lay on the walkway, but the house was safe. The bronze plaque caught the afternoon sun, shining like a shield. I turned and walked back inside. I closed the heavy oak door. I locked it. I walked to the kitchen and picked up a broom. I had to go outside and sweep up the glass. A museum must be kept clean for the guests. And tomorrow we were expecting a full house. The silence that followed the departure of the police cruisers was heavy and absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears after an explosion. The neighbors had retreated into their homes, the show was over, and the street was empty. Inside the house, Courtney was moving like a ghost. She was not screaming anymore. She was not fighting. The fight had been knocked out of her the moment the handcuffs clicked around Kendrick's wrists. She knew she was next. The news of the arrest would hit the local blogs within the hour. The allegation of fraud would reach the real estate board by the afternoon. Her career, built on a foundation of appearances and aggressive sales tactics, was crumbling in real time. I stood in the hallway leaning on my cane, watching her pack. She was dragging suitcases down the stairs, the expensive wheels thumping against the wood. Thump, thump, thump. It was the sound of a retreat. She didn't ask for help. She didn't look at me. She moved with a frantic energy, throwing clothes into bags without folding them. The silk blouses, the designer shoes, the handbags she had prized more than her own family were now just debris she was trying to salvage from a shipwreck. She reached the bottom of the stairs and paused. She looked around the living room. She looked at the gray walls she had painted just days ago. She looked at the spot where she had planned to put her new Italian sofa. She was looking at a future that had evaporated. Then she looked at me. I expected to see anger in her eyes. I expected her to curse me, to blame me for ruining her life. But there was no anger. There was only fear. She looked at me as if I were something terrifying. She looked at me and realized that she had spent years underestimating the man standing in the shadows. She had thought I was a feeble old man, a burden to be managed. Now she saw the steel. She saw the mechanic who could dismantle an engine and put it back together in the dark. She saw the judge, the jury, and the executioner of her greed. "I called a taxi," she whispered. Her voice was brittle like dry leaves. I nodded. I did not speak. There was nothing left to say. She gripped the handle of her suitcase. Her knuckles were white. I don't have anywhere to go," she said, her voice trembling. "My accounts are frozen. The bank called while I was upstairs. They are seizing the car." I looked at her. I thought about the night she threw my records in the trash. I thought about the moment she told me I would be moved to a facility in Fresno. I thought about the way she looked at my son when he was being arrested, the look of pure self-preservation. "You have friends, Courtney," I said calmly. "You have all those special people you invited to your parties. I am sure one of them will take you in." She flinched. She knew as well as I did that those friends were fair-weather birds. They would scatter the moment the storm hit. A horn honked outside. The taxi was here. She opened the door. The afternoon light spilled in, harsh and revealing. She looked back one last time, not at me but at the house she had tried to steal, the house that had fought back. "Goodbye, Solomon," she said. "Goodbye, Courtney," I replied. She walked out. She dragged her bags down the steps, struggling with the weight. The taxi driver did not get out to help her. She loaded them herself, breaking a nail, sweating in her ruined white suit. She got into the back seat. The car pulled away. I watched it go until it turned the corner and disappeared. I closed the door. I locked it. I threw the deadbolt. I was alone. The house was empty. The air was still. I took a deep breath. It smelled of her perfume and the chemical scent of the gray paint. It smelled of intrusion. I walked to the kitchen. I made myself a cup of tea. My hands were steady. I drank the tea standing up, looking out at the backyard. The weeds were growing in the garden, but the rose bushes Etta had planted were still there, resilient and thorny. I had work to do. I went to the garage. I found them in the back corner under a tarp. The old paint cans, sunflower yellow. I pried the lid off the first can. The paint had separated oil sitting on top of pigment. I took a wooden stirrer and began to mix. I stirred until my arm ached. I stirred until the color came together bright and warm and alive. I brought the cans into the living room. I laid down drop cloths. I didn't hire a crew. I didn't call for help. I picked up the roller myself. The first stroke of yellow paint over the gray wall felt like a prayer. It covered the cold industrial color with a swath of sunshine. I painted with rhythm. Up and down, up and down. I covered the gray, I covered the pretension, I covered the lie. It took me 4 hours. My shoulders burned, my back throbbed, but I didn't stop. I painted until the room glowed again. I painted until the house felt like it was breathing. When the walls were done, I went outside to the recycling bins. I opened the lid. There they were, my records, my history. I pulled them out one by one. I wiped off the coffee grounds and the dust. I brought them inside. I went to the basement and brought up my turntable. I placed it back in its rightful spot in the corner of the living room. I hooked up the speakers. I placed the records back on the shelf I had built. They were battered. The covers were torn. But the vinyl was tough. I pulled out a Love Supreme by John Coltrane. I placed it on the platter. I lowered the needle. The crackle of the dust was loud, but then the saxophone cut through. Pure, soulful, eternal. I sat down in my old armchair, the one Courtney had tried to throw away. I closed my eyes. The music filled the room. The yellow walls held the sound, warming it. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the smell of old vinyl. I felt a presence in the room. I felt Etta. She was sitting in the chair across from me, smiling. She was humming along to the music. "We did it, Etta," I whispered. "We saved it." The sun began to set. The light coming through the bay window turned golden. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. The house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was full. It was full of the past, and it was safe for the future. I walked out onto the front porch. The evening air was cool. The streetlights were flickering on. I sat down on the swing bench. It creaked under my weight, a familiar, comforting sound. I looked at the bronze plaque on the wall, Solomon and Etta Hayes Memorial House. It wasn't just a name. It was a shield. I thought about Kendrick. He was likely in a holding cell right now. He was facing charges of fraud, possession, and elder abuse. He was facing years of legal battles. He had lost his wife. He had lost his home. He had lost his father. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was a hot, salty track on my skin. I didn't wipe it away. A father mourns the child he lost, even if that child is still breathing. I mourned the boy he used to be. The boy who used to sit on this porch and ask me to tell him stories about the stars. That boy was gone. He had been consumed by a world that told him enough was never enough. But I had saved him from the worst of it. I had saved him from becoming a man who succeeded in destroying his own blood. I had stopped him before he could sell his soul completely. Maybe in prison, stripped of his pretension and his greed, he would find himself again. Maybe he would find the boy who used to look at the stars. I looked out at the neighborhood. Mrs. Johnson was walking her dog. She waved at me. I waved back. I am an old man. My body is tired. My hands shake when I hold a pen. But inside I am iron. I built a life with these hands. I built a legacy. And when they tried to take it from me, I didn't roll over. I didn't go quietly into the night. I fought. I fought with the only weapons that matter: truth, law, and the unshakable belief that dignity is not for sale, They thought they were dealing with a victim. They thought they were dealing with a statistic. They didn't know they were dealing with a father who was willing to burn down the bridge to save the castle. I lost my son, but I kept my self-respect. And more importantly, I taught them a lesson they will carry for the rest of their lives. A lesson for everyone who thinks the elderly are easy targets. A lesson for every child who thinks their inheritance is a right, not a privilege. Never judge a book by its worn cover. And never ever underestimate a man who has built an empire from 2 bare hands just because those hands now tremble with age. The sun dipped below the horizon. The sky turned a deep, bruised purple. I sat on my porch, the guardian of my history. I am Solomon Hayes, and I am exactly where I belong. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to stand up for yourself when everyone counted you out, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from. And if you believe that justice always finds a way, hit that like button and subscribe. We have more stories to tell. Stories of resilience. Stories of truth. Until next time, keep your head up and keep your legacy safe. This journey taught me that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. My son looked at my trembling hands and saw frailty, but he forgot that these same hands built the foundation he stood upon. The most painful lesson was realizing that shared blood does not guarantee loyalty. True family is built on respect, not transaction. To anyone feeling disregarded because of their age, remember this. You are not a burden to be managed. You are a library of wisdom. Do not let anyone bankrupt your dignity to fund their greed. It is better to stand alone in a house built on truth than to live in a crowded mansion built on lies. If you believe I did the right thing by protecting my legacy, hit that like button and share this story with someone who needs strength. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven Kendrick or was justice served? I will see you in the next story.